I was splashed with a full glass of expensive red wine by Chloe, the arrogant ex-wife of my husband, because she wanted to humiliate me on my wedding day to a man who is currently in a deep coma. The cold liquid dripped down my nose, staining my cheap, white lace dress, while the wealthy guests in the penthouse of the Cromwell Tower laughed at me. I could feel the stinging heat of embarrassment rising in my chest, but I stood still, like a statue, clenching my fists. Beneath the table, I had to endure this insult because I needed the legal protection that the name, Eleanor Cromwell, would provide me and my little sister if I walked away. The debt collectors from the dark streets of Brooklyn would find us and destroy everything we had left. Chloe leaned in, her breath smelling of expensive champagne, and whispered that a gutter rat like me didn't deserve even the scraps of this family. She called me a gold digger who was only waiting for a dead man to breathe his last, so I could steal his fortune. Every word was a sharp blade, cutting into my dignity, but I kept my head high and my eyes cold as I stared at her perfectly manicured face, which was twisted into a mask of pure and calculated malice. I knew that if I showed any sign of weakness or pain, she would only press her advantage and crush me under her heels. Chloe didn't stop at the wine, but grabbed my long lace veil and threw it onto the sticky, wine-soaked floor, commanding me to get down and wipe up the mess I made with my own hands. The crowd cheered, as if this was a part of the entertainment, while the flashing lights of the cameras blinded my vision. I felt a surge of burning rage, but I remembered the pale face of my sister, Lily, lying in her hospital bed, and I forced my knees to bend. I knelt down on the cold marble and began to scrub the floor with the delicate fabric that was supposed to symbolize my new life. As I moved, I stayed close to the medical bed, where Ryan Cromwell was lying perfectly still, surrounded by his expensive monitoring machines. My fingers brushed against his cold skin, and my medical instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. With his vital signs, I noticed a small, clear tube hidden behind the main intravenous line, which was dripping a strange yellowish liquid into his veins. I realized that Chloe was not just here to mock me, but she was actively trying to ensure that Ryan never woke up again. The realization made my heart race, because I was the only one who could see this hidden crime happening in plain sight, while the elite of New York City watched me crawl on the ground like a worthless servant. Just as I was finishing the humiliating task, I saw a shadow moving near the floor-to-ceiling windows and recognized the face of a man from the gang who had been hunting my family. He was dressed in a cheap suit, trying to blend with the elite, but the scars on his neck gave him away. As a predator, Chloe noticed my sudden pale face and followed my gaze, realizing that I was truly afraid of someone in this room. She let out a cruel laugh and suggested that perhaps my past had finally caught up with me and my little sister. She threatened to call security to throw me out into their hands unless I signed a document she had hidden in her diamond clutch. It was a full confession of theft and fraud, which would give her complete control over my life and my future. I realized that I was trapped between a group of cold-blooded killers and a woman who was even more dangerous and heartless. The pressure was building in my chest until I felt like I could no longer breathe. In this gilded cage, I looked at the man in the shadow, and then at the dying man in the bed, knowing that my next move would decide the fate of everyone I loved. I knew that signing that paper would be my death warrant, but refusing it would lead the wolves directly to Lily, who was helpless. In her bed, I looked back at the hidden, yellowish drip line and saw that the fluid was moving faster now, which would surely stop Ryan's heart within the next 10 minutes. I had to act immediately, but Chloe was blocking my path with her pointed heels and her sharp tongue. She demanded that I sign the paper right now, or she would reveal my sister's secret location too. The men waiting in the shadows. I felt a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead while the medical monitor began to beep in a rhythmic and terrifyingly slow pace. The sound was like a countdown to a murder that nobody else seemed to notice. Amidst the loud music and the hollow laughter, I grabbed a small silver knife from the tray of a passing waiter and hid it inside the folds of my ruined dress. I knew that if I failed, I would lose my sister and my last chance for a safe life under the Cromwell name. My mind raced through every medical procedure I had ever learned as the ghost surgeon, while my body prepared for a desperate and violent move against my enemies. I could feel the weight of the silver knife against my thigh and the heat of the wine still drying on my skin like a mark of my own shame. I took a deep breath and lunged toward the medical machine, pretending to trip over my long ruined wedding veil so I could reach the tube. Chloe screamed in surprise as I fell against the equipment and used the hidden knife to slice the secret line that was delivering the deadly poison to Ryan's weak body. The yellowish liquid sprayed onto the white sheets like a silent cry for help while I felt the strong grip of a security guard pulling me back by my hair. Chloe was hysterical, shouting that I was trying to kill the man I had just sworn to protect. In front of every wealthy witness in New York City, the man from the shadows moved closer toward the bed with a menacing glint in his dark eyes and a hand reaching for his concealed weapon. I looked at the heart monitor and saw the line go flat for one long and agonizing second before a sudden and powerful beep filled the room. The hand of the comatose man suddenly twitched and grabbed my wrist with a strength that should have been impossible for someone in a 3-year sleep. Ryan's eyes snapped open and they were filled with a cold and terrifying fire that promised a dark and bloody retribution for everyone present. The grip on my wrist was like a band of freezing steel, and the silence that fell over the penthouse was so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Ryan Cromwell, the man who had been a vegetable for 3 long years, was now staring at me with eyes that were as sharp and predatory as a hawk. I could see the confusion and the lethal clarity in his gaze as he looked from my wine-stained dress to the silver knife still clutched in my other trembling hand. Chloe's voice which had been a high-pitched screech of fake grief and fury, suddenly died in her throat as she stumbled, back against a marble pillar, her face turning the color of ash. The security guards who were previously crushing my shoulders let go of me, as if I had suddenly become a source of high voltage electricity, while the elite guests stood frozen with their mouths wide open. Ryan did not speak at first, but his presence seemed to expand and fill the entire space, suffocating every lie and every insult that had been thrown at me. Just a few minutes before this impossible moment, I felt the pulse in his hand, steady and strong, beating against my skin, telling me that the King of New York had finally returned to reclaim his stolen throne. Chloe tried to find her voice, her eyes darting toward the hidden tube I had just severed, and the pool of toxic yellow liquid that was now soaking into the expensive Persian rug. She rushed toward the bed with her arms outstretched, pretending to weep with joy while her heart was clearly filled with the terror of a cornered animal. She called his name in a trembling sob, telling him that I was a crazy woman who had tried to murder him in his sleep right after we were forced to marry. Ryan's eyes didn't even flicker toward her. Instead, they stayed locked on mine, searching for a truth that I wasn't ready to give him. In front of this pack of hungry wolves, he slowly turned his head, his neck muscles creaking from years of disuse, and looked at the man in the shadows who was reaching for a concealed gun. With a voice that sounded like grinding stones, Ryan commanded the head of security to seize the intruder and take Chloe out of his sight before he lost his very limited patience. The authority in his tone was absolute, and 3 guards immediately tackled the hitman while 2 others grabbed Chloe by her slender arms, ignoring her screams of protest and her claims of innocence and love. The room cleared out with terrifying speed as the guests realized that the party was over and the retribution was about to begin, leaving only the 2 of us and a few trusted medical staff. Ryan finally released my wrist, but the mark of his fingers stayed etched into my skin, a red reminder of the power he possessed, even after 3 years of being completely helpless. He pointed at the severed tube on the floor and demanded to know why a gutter rat like me was carrying a silver knife and cutting his life support lines on our very first wedding night. I stood my ground, smoothing out the ruined fabric of my white lace dress, and told him that I hadn't cut his life support but had instead stopped the slow drip of a neurotoxin that was designed to keep his brain in a permanent state of artificial sleep. I explained that the yellowish fluid was not medicine but a death sentence disguised as care, and that Chloe had been the one holding the needle for the past 6 months. He looked at the liquid, then back at me, his expression unreadable and cold, as if he was weighing my life against a mountain of evidence he didn't yet have in his hands. I knew he didn't trust me, and why should he, when I was just a stranger who had bought her way into his family name? I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out the small glass vial I had managed to fill with the toxin before the guards had grabbed me during the struggle. I told him that if he didn't believe me, he could have his private lab test the contents, and he would find enough poison to kill 10 men of his size and weight. I also mentioned that my sister, Lily, was currently being held at gunpoint because I had dared to interfere with Chloe's plan to inherit his entire $5 billion estate. Ryan sat up further, the hospital gown sliding off his broad shoulders, revealing the scars of his accident and the strength that had not completely withered away during his long, silent slumber. He took the vial from my hand, his fingers brushing mine, sending a jolt of unwanted electricity through my entire body, making me realize how dangerous this man truly was to my heart and my safety. He looked at the vial with a dark and calculating intensity, then looked at the door where his guards were standing, waiting for his next set of ruthless orders. He told me that if I was lying, he would personally ensure that I never saw the light of day again. But if I was telling the truth, he would make New York burn for me. The silence that followed was broken only by the steady hum of the machines that were no longer poisoning him, and I felt the weight of his suspicion pressing down on my tired and aching shoulders. I told him that I didn't want his money or his city. I only wanted my sister back and a chance to live without a target on my back from the debt collectors in Brooklyn. Ryan let out a dry and hollow laugh, saying that nobody enters the Cromwell family for free, and that I was now tied to him by a contract that even death could not easily break apart. He picked up the bedside phone and dialed a number from memory, a number that belonged to the highest level of the Manhattan Police Department and the city's most feared private investigators. He gave them 2 names and 1 location, the hospital where Lily was being held, and told them they had exactly 20 minutes to bring her to this penthouse or he would shut down every bank in the city. I realized then that Ryan Cromwell was not just a man who had woken up. He was a force of nature that would crush anyone who stood in his way, including me if I didn't play my cards with the utmost care. He turned his attention back to me, his gaze traveling slowly down my stained dress and my messy hair, stopping at the small, surgical scar on my own palm, which I had tried so hard to hide from everyone. He asked me how a girl from the streets knew how to identify a rare neurotoxin and how she knew exactly where to cut the line without triggering the main hospital alarms. I felt my heart stop for a second, because my identity as the ghost surgeon was the only weapon I had left in this world, and if he found out, he would never let me go again. I looked him in the eye and told him that when you spend your life fighting for crumbs, you learn how to recognize the taste of poison before it even touches your tongue or your veins. Ryan didn't seem satisfied with my answer, but he didn't push me further. Instead, he leaned back against the pillows and told me to stay exactly where I was. He said that until Lily was safe, I belonged to him, and that my life was now his to protect or to destroy, depending on the results of that small glass vial in his hand. I stood there, a prisoner in a palace, watching the sun begin to rise over the skyline of New York, knowing that the real war had only just begun for us. The grip on my wrist was like a band of freezing steel, and the silence that fell over the penthouse was so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Ryan Cromwell, the man who had been a vegetable for 3 long years, was now staring at me with eyes that were as sharp and predatory as a hawk. I could see the confusion and the lethal clarity in his gaze as he looked from my wine-stained dress to the silver knife still clutched in my other trembling hand. Chloe's voice, which had been a high-pitched screech of fake grief and fury, suddenly died in her throat as she stumbled back against a marble pillar, her face turning the color of ash. The security guards who were previously crushing my shoulders let go of me as if I had suddenly become a source of high voltage electricity, while the elite guests stood frozen with their mouths wide open. Ryan did not speak at first, but his presence seemed to expand and fill the entire space, suffocating every lie and every insult that had been thrown at me just a few minutes before this impossible moment. I felt the pulse in his hand, steady and strong, beating against my skin, telling me that the King of New York had finally returned to reclaim his stolen throne. Chloe tried to find her voice, her eyes darting toward the hidden tube I had just severed, and the pool of toxic yellow liquid that was now soaking into the expensive Persian rug. She rushed toward the bed with her arms outstretched, pretending to weep with joy while her heart was clearly filled with the terror of a cornered animal. She called his name in a trembling sob, telling him that I was a crazy woman who had tried to murder him in his sleep right after we were forced to marry. Ryan's eyes didn't even flicker toward her. Instead, they stayed locked on mine, searching for a truth that I wasn't ready to give him in front of this pack of hungry wolves. He slowly turned his head, his neck muscles creaking from years of disuse, and looked at the man in the shadows who was reaching for a concealed gun. With a voice that sounded like grinding stones, Ryan commanded the head of security to seize the intruder and take Chloe out of his sight before he lost his very limited patience. The authority in his tone was absolute, and 3 guards immediately tackled the hitman while 2 others grabbed Chloe by her slender arms, ignoring her screams of protest and her claims of innocence and love. The room cleared out with terrifying speed as the guests realized that the party was over and the retribution was about to begin, leaving only the 2 of us and a few trusted medical staff. Ryan finally released my wrist, but the mark of his fingers stayed, etched into my skin, a red reminder of the power he possessed, even after 3 years of being completely helpless. He pointed at the severed tube on the floor and demanded to know why a gutter rat like me was carrying a silver knife and cutting his life support lines on our very first wedding night. I stood my ground, smoothing out the ruined fabric of my white lace dress, and told him that I hadn't cut his life support but had instead stopped the slow drip of a neurotoxin that was designed to keep his brain in a permanent state of artificial sleep. I explained that the yellowish fluid was not medicine but a death sentence disguised as care, and that Chloe had been the one holding the needle for the past 6 months. He looked at the liquid, then back at me, his expression unreadable and cold, as if he was weighing my life against a mountain of evidence he didn't yet have in his hands. I knew he didn't trust me, and why should he, when I was just a stranger who had bought her way into his family name. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out the small glass vial I had managed to fill with the toxin before. The guards had grabbed me during the struggle. I told him that. If he didn't believe me, he could have. His private lab test, the contents, and he would find enough poison to kill 10 men of his size and weight. I also mentioned that my sister, Lily, was currently being held at gunpoint because I had dared to interfere with Chloe's plan to inherit his entire $5 billion estate. Ryan sat up further, the hospital gown sliding off his broad shoulders, revealing the scars of his accident and the strength that had not completely withered away during his long, silent slumber. He took the vial from my hand, his fingers brushing mine, sending a jolt of unwanted electricity through my entire body, making me realize how dangerous this man truly was to my heart and my safety. He looked at the vial with a dark and calculating intensity, then looked at the door where his guards were standing, waiting for his next set of ruthless orders. He told me that, if I was lying, he would personally ensure that I never saw the light of day again, but if I was telling the truth, he would make New York burn for me. The silence that followed was broken only by the steady hum of the machines that were no longer poisoning him, and I felt the weight of his suspicion pressing down on my tired and aching shoulders. I told him that I didn't want his money or his city. I only wanted my sister back and a chance to live without a target on my back from the debt collectors in Brooklyn. Ryan let out a dry and hollow laugh, saying that nobody enters the Cromwell family for free and that I was now tied to him by a contract that even death could not easily break apart. He picked up the bedside phone and dialed a number from memory, a number that belonged to the highest level of the Manhattan Police Department and the city's most feared private investigators. He gave them 2 names and 1 location, the hospital where Lily was being held, and told them they had exactly 20 minutes to bring her to this penthouse or he would shut down every bank in the city. I realized then that Ryan Cromwell was not just a man who had woken up. He was a force of nature that would crush anyone who stood in his way, including me if I didn't play my cards with the utmost care. He turned his attention back to me, his gaze traveling slowly down my stained dress and my messy hair, stopping at the small, surgical scar on my own palm which I had tried so hard to hide from everyone. He asked me how a girl from the streets knew how to identify a rare neurotoxin and how she knew exactly where to cut the line without triggering the main hospital alarms. I felt my heart stop for a second because my identity as the ghost surgeon was the only weapon I had left in this world, and if he found out, he would never let me go again. I looked him in the eye and told him that when you spend your life fighting for crumbs, you learn how to recognize the taste of poison before it even touches your tongue or your veins. Ryan didn't seem satisfied with my answer, but he didn't push me further. Instead, he leaned back against the pillows and told me to stay exactly where I was. He said that until Lily was safe, I belonged to him, and that my life was now his to protect or to destroy, depending on the results of that small glass vial in his hand. I stood there, a prisoner in a palace, watching the sun begin to rise over the skyline of New York, knowing that the real war had only just begun for us. Ryan's muscles bulged as he hauled Victoria back from the yawning abyss of the New York skyline, while the wind roared through the broken glass, trying to pull them both into the night. I watched, with bated breath, holding Lily closer to the marble pillar as the pressure stabilized and the security Team Koi Kung regained control of the ventilation system. Victoria was screaming, a sound of pure and unadulterated madness, as she clawed at Ryan's face, her nails leaving deep, red tracks on his skin. He threw her toward the center of the room, where she landed with a heavy thud amongst the wreckage of the grand piano and the shattered crystal chandeliers. Ryan stood, tall, for a single second, his hospital gown fluttering like a tattered flag of war. But then his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the jagged floor. I saw it. Then a massive shard of reinforced glass was buried deep in his chest, pulsing with every beat of his fading heart. Victoria let out a jagged laugh through her bloodied teeth, claiming that, even if she lost today, she would still take the King of New York to the grave with her. The blood was beginning to pool around his body, a dark and terrifying stain on the white marble that looked like an omen of our shared and tragic end. Ryan gripped the glass shard with his bare hands, trying to pull it out, but I screamed at him to stop, because it was the only thing keeping him from bleeding out. In seconds, Victoria reached into her torn silk dress and pulled out a thick leather folder, tossing it through the broken window frame, watching as it was swept away by the powerful gale. She whispered that the world would soon know the truth about the surgeon who lives in the shadows and the blood she has on her hands. From years ago, I ignored her and slid across the glass-covered floor, my own knees being sliced open by the sharp remains of the penthouse windows. I reached Ryan's side and felt his pulse, which was erratic and weak, like a flickering candle in a storm that would not end today. The heart monitor, which had been moved close to the bed, was now emitting a series of frantic beeps that signaled his imminent collapse into the dark void of death. I looked into his eyes and saw the shadow of the abyss, but I also saw a flicker of trust that was both a gift and a heavy burden for me to carry. I knew that if I failed, now, everything we had fought for would be burned to ashes by the woman who was currently being handcuffed by the security team in the corner of the ruined and chaotic penthouse suite. Outside the broken walls, dozens of bright lights began to swarm like angry hornets, and I realized that the media drones had finally arrived to document our ruin. The flashing cameras captured the sight of me kneeling over the fallen billionaire, my hands covered in his blood, while Victoria was dragged away by the federal agents. I knew my face was being broadcast to millions of people across the country, and that my secret life was ending with every click of the digital shutters. I didn't care about the fame or the danger, because Ryan's eyes were beginning to roll back into his head as the glass shard shifted closer to his main artery. I barked orders at the remaining medical staff, telling them to bring me the portable laser, scalpel, and the emergency sealants from the hidden safe in the study. The chief doctor was paralyzed with fear, but he obeyed me as if I were the queen of the hospital. Sensing the lethal authority in my every word, I realized that, to save him, I would have to perform a complex thoracic surgery in the middle of a disaster zone while the entire world watched. My every move, the drones moved closer, their red lights blinking like the eyes of hungry demons waiting for the final and most bloody act of this tragic and gilded opera of New York City. I used the laser scalpel to widen the wound around the glass shard, and the smell of singed air filled my lungs as I worked with a cold and calculated precision. I could hear the reporters shouting from the helicopters circling the tower, their voices distorted by the wind and the sound of the sirens rising from the streets below us. My hands were moving with the speed of light, cauterizing the bleeding vessels and clearing the fragments of crystal that were threatening to puncture his lung and end his life. I felt the cold sweat on my brow, but I didn't stop, even when a gust of wind, Ganu, knocked me off balance near the jagged edge of the floor. Ryan groaned, a low and painful sound that tore at my heart, but I whispered to him to stay with me and to keep fighting for the revenge he had promised us. Both earlier, I reached for the surgical clamps and felt the metal slide into the wound, locking onto the main bleeder, just as the heart monitor gave a long and terrifyingly high-pitched whistle of alarm. I realized that the glass shard had moved and was nay resting right against the wall of his aorta, meaning one wrong move would cause a fountain of blood to end the king of New York forever on this cold marble floor. I looked at the drones va, then at my sister who was watching me with wide eyes from her own stretcher, and I knew that I could not afford to fail this man or my own future any more today. The drones were so close now that I could see the lenses focusing on the surgical site, and I knew the world was seeing the legendary ghost surgeon in her true and most desperate element right now. I took a deep breath and gripped the base of the glass shard with my bare fingers, feeling the sharp edges cutting into my own skin, but I didn't let go. I began to pull the shard out, millimeter by millimeter, while my other hand worked the sealant to plug the hole before the pressure could drop again. The sound of the wind was a deafening roar, and the light of the helicopters was blinding, but I kept my eyes fixed on the tattered and bloody chest of the man I had just married. I could feel the tension in the room as the security guards and the doctors held their breath, waiting for the final result of my dangerous and illegal field surgery. Suddenly, the shard came, free, and a small spray of red liquid hit my face, but I slammed the sealant into the wound and held it there with all of my remaining and fading strength. Today, the heart monitor flickered and then returned to a steady and rhythmic beat that sounded like a victory march in the middle of a graveyard of glass and broken dreams. I fell back, my hands shaking and my heart racing as I realized that I had actually saved him, but at the cost of my entire secret and the safety of my future. Victoria was being dragged into the elevator, but she turned her head and spat a final curse at me, saying that the folder she threw contained the evidence to my involvement in the death of her father years ago. I watched the drones hover over the spot where the folder had landed on the roof of a smaller building below. I saw a mysterious man in a black coat picket up and disappear into the darkness. Ryan Mo, his eyes looking at me with a mixture of pain, deep, terrifying gratitude that I wasn't sure I wanted from a man as dangerous as he was today. He reached out, touched my cheek with his bloody hand, whispering that I was his now and that nobody would ever take me from him again. After what I had done here, the helicopter circled lower. The light of the world was shining on us, but I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the wind or the broken windows above. I realized that, although I had saved the king, I had just invited a new, even more powerful enemy to hunt me down for the secrets I had tried to bury in the shadows of my hidden bloody past. Today, the cameras kept flashing, capturing the image of the surgeon bride the fallen king, as we lay together in the wreckage of his throne, while the mysterious man with the folder began to dial a number that would change everything for us within hours. The sirens of at least 10 police cars were echoing through the shattered remains of the penthouse, while the cold morning light of New York revealed the total destruction of my secret life and my future safety. Today, Ryan was still lying on the floor, his face as pale as the marble, but his eyes were burning with a protective and dangerous fire as he watched the intruders enter his private sanctuary. He had tried to use his vast media influence to kill the footage of my surgery, but the mysterious man in black had already leaked the files to the New York Times and every major news outlet across the globe. Right now, I felt like a cornered animal as the cameras of the police, body cams, and the lingering media drones captured my every movement and the blood that still stained my white silk wedding dress. Today, the king of New York was powerful, but even he could not stop the avalanche of legal accusations that were currently sliding down the mountain to crush us both into the cold and hard asphalt of reality. Today, a man in a dark navy suit with a silver pin representing the New York State Medical Board stepped over the broken glass, holding a warrant that looked like a death sentence for my career. He introduced himself as Director Harrison, the most feared man in the medical world, and he didn't look at the dying billionaire, but only at me with a look of pure and clinical hatred. Today, I stood my ground, shielding Lily with my own body as the investigators began to bag the surgical tools I had used to save Ryan's life. Just minutes ago in this room, Harrison told me that I was being charged with practicing medicine without a valid New York license and for the unauthorized and high risk procedure on a prominent citizen like Ryan Cromwell. Today, he also mentioned that new evidence had been presented to the district attorney, linking me to the suspicious death of Arthur, Victoria's father, who had passed away under my care in a small clinic 5 years ago. I felt the blood drain from my face as the ghost of the past finally caught up with me, and I realized that Victoria had planned this move for a long time today. Every single person in the room was watching me, waiting for a confession or a sign of guilt, but I only felt a cold and steady resolve to protect my sister and my dignity. Ryan tried to speak, his voice a ragged whisper, as he told Harrison that I had saved him, but the director ignored him, stating that even a miracle cannot erase a crime of this magnitude. I saw the handcuffs being pulled from the officer's belt, and I knew that the name, Eleanor Cromwell, was no longer a shield, but a cage that was closing in on us both. The man in black was not just a random thief, but a professional fixer who worked for a shadow organization that wanted to control the Cromwell empire and its vast medical technology. Today, I realized that Lily was still the ultimate leverage, because if I went to jail, she would be left in the hands of the state, or worse, in the hands of Victoria's remaining and dangerous allies. Today, Director Harrison leaned in, his voice low and cold, as he told me that if I didn't cooperate and sign a full confession, Lily would be moved to a public facility where her specialized care would be cut off immediately. Today, I looked at Ryan, and I saw the frustration in his eyes as he realized his body was still too weak to stand up and crush these men like he usually would. The logic of the situation was clear. I had to surrender, to buy time for Ryan to recover, and for Lily to be moved to a secure and private location away from this madness. Today, I stepped forward and offered my wrists, watching the cold steel of the handcuff snap shut, while the flashes of the cameras burned into my tired and aching soul. Today, Victoria might be in a cell, but her poison was still working its way through the veins of our lives, and I was the only one who could find the cure. Today, as they led me toward the elevator, I saw the man in black standing on a balcony across the street, watching me with a high-powered telescope and a smile that chilled my very bones. Today, he held up a single finger, as if to say that I was number one on his list of targets, and then he vanished into the shadows of the morning mist. Today, Ryan reached out and grabbed my hand one last time, his grip still strong, as he promised that he would spend every cent of his $5 billion to get me out of that prison. Today, I told him to focus on his heart and to watch over Lily, because if she was safe, I could endure any prison and any trial the city of New York could throw at me. Harrison pushed me into the elevator, and the doors closed on the image of Ryan and Lily, leaving me in the cold and sterile company of the men who wanted to bury the ghost surgeon forever. Today, the ride down was long and silent, and I could feel the weight of the city pressing in on the glass box, but I kept my head high and my heart cold. I knew that the real war had only just begun, and that I had more secrets than they could ever hope to find in 1,000 leather folders or legal documents today. I was ready to face the judge and the world, because the truth was far more dangerous than any lie they could ever invent to destroy my name. Inside the police station, the air was thick with the smell of cheap coffee and old paper, and the noise of the city was a distant and hollow roar. In my ears today, they sat, me in an interrogation room with a single flickering light and a mirror that I knew was hiding a dozen eyes that were searching for my hidden and bloody past. Harrison sat across from me, his face a mask of cold and calculated triumph as he laid out the photos of Arthur, Victoria's father, and the medical records that proved I was the last person to see him alive today. He told me that the man had been a hero to the city, and that my negligence or malice had robbed New York of its greatest and most beloved philanthropist today. I laughed, a low and jagged sound, and told him that Arthur was not a hero, but a monster who had used his wealth to hide a dark and predatory side that only his victims ever truly knew. Harrison slammed his hand on the table, calling me a liar and a trashy girl who was trying to smear the name of a dead man to save her own skin. I leaned in, my voice a steady whisper, and told him that I had the audio recordings of Arthur's final moments, and they were hidden in a place that even the man in black would never find. In his wildest dreams, the fear in Harrison's eyes was small but visible, and I knew that I had just found the first crack in the wall of their grand and expensive conspiracy. The door of the room was kicked open, and a woman in a sharp white suit walked in, holding a stack of legal papers that looked like they belonged in the hands of the president today. She was Sarah, the top defense attorney in the country, and she told Harrison that her client, Elena Cromwell, was being released immediately on a $10 million bond paid for by Ryan Cromwell himself. Harrison tried to argue, but Sarah slapped a court order onto the table, stating that the evidence provided by the man in black was illegally obtained and could not be used to hold my client for another single second. I felt a surge of relief, but I also knew that this was only a temporary victory, and that they would be waiting for me as soon as I stepped out into the cold and rainy streets of Manhattan today. Sarah leaned in and whispered that Ryan had been moved to a secret medical facility, and that Lily was already on her way to a safe house in the Hamptons right now. Today, I stood up, the handcuffs falling away, and I walked out of the police station like a queen returning to her throne, while the media cameras captured my every movement and my cold and steady gaze. The ghost of the past was still hunting me, but I was now the one who was setting the traps and the rules for the final and most deadly game of all today. I walked through the glass doors of the precinct, and the world exploded into a chaotic sea of flashing white lights and hungry reporters who were screaming my name like a death sentence. Today, Sarah had her security team form a human wall around me, their bodies pushing back the tide of cameras and microphones that were trying to record every drop of sweat on my face right now. I climbed into the back of a heavy black, armored SUV, and the door slammed shut, cutting off the roar of the city with a heavy and expensive, metallic thud. Today, I could feel the vibrations of the engine as the driver accelerated onto the FDR drive, weaving through the morning traffic of Manhattan with the skill of a professional racer. Today, I looked into the rearview mirror and saw a single black sedan with tinted windows following us at a precise and terrifying distance of exactly 50 meters. I knew that the man in black was not finished with me, and that the $10 million bond Ryan paid had only turned me into a more valuable target for the people who wanted the audio evidence destroyed. Sarah was on her phone, her voice a sharp and icy whisper as she coordinated with Ryan's private army to ensure our safe passage to the secret facility in New Jersey. I touched the small surgical scar on my palm and realized that my life was no longer my own, but a piece in a game of $5 billion stakes. Today, the black sedan suddenly accelerated, its engine roaring like a predator as it tried to ram our rear bumper near the edge of the Queensboro Bridge. Right now, today, my driver swerved, the heavy tires screeching against the asphalt as he fought to keep the vehicle from spinning into the cold and dark waters of the East River below us. I gripped the leather handle of the door, my heart pounding like a drum as I watched the man in black lean out of his window with a device that looked like a high-tech electronic jammer. Today, suddenly, the speakers of our SUV crackled with static, and then a deep and familiar voice filled the cabin, calm as and terrifyingly steady in the middle of this chaos. Today, it was Ryan, speaking through a secure satellite link, telling me to hold on tight and to look at the bridge tower exactly 300 yards ahead of our current and dangerous position. He said that nobody touches his property and gets away with it, and that he was about to show the man in black the true meaning of a hostile takeover. In New York City, I saw a series of heavy steel bollards rise from the road, surface with a deafening grind of metal against stone, perfectly timed to trap the pursuer behind a wall of impenetrable steel. The black sedan had no time to brake, and it slammed into the barrier with a roar of twisted metal and breaking glass that echoed across the bridge like a thunderclap. The driver of our SUV didn't slow down, even for a single second. As we left, the wreckage of the man in black behind us, in a cloud of smoke and burning rubber. Today, I looked back and saw the man in black crawling out of the ruined car, his face covered in blood. But he was already reaching for a phone to report his failure to his masters. Today, we reached the secret facility, a massive, windowless concrete block hidden beneath an old warehouse near the industrial docks of Jersey City. Right now, today, the security gates opened automatically, and we descended into a subterranean world of white, light and sterile, air that smelled of ozone and expensive medical equipment and high technology. I was led through 3 levels of biometric scanners until I reached a heavy steel door that was guarded by 4 men in tactical gear with silent weapons. Today, inside, the room was filled with monitors displaying Ryan's vitals and the heart rate of a king who was recovering at a speed that defied every medical book I had ever read. As a ghost surgeon today, Ryan was sitting up in bed, his chest wrapped in clean white bandages and a laptop open in front of him, showing the faces of every board member of the New York Medical Council. Right now today, he looked up, his eyes locking onto mine with a dark intensity that made me feel both safe and completely trapped in his world. He pointed to the screen, and I saw Director Harrison's face, which was frozen in a mask of pure and absolute terror as he looked at a document that Ryan had just sent him. Ryan told me that he had just liquidated every single asset Harrison owned, including his offshore accounts and his 3 mansions in the Hamptons and South Florida. He said that he didn't need the law to punish a man like Harrison, and that by tomorrow morning, the director would be living in a shelter for the homeless if he didn't cooperate. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the scale of the power Ryan possessed and how easily he could erase a person from existence with a few clicks of a mouse. Ryan closed the laptop and told his guards to leave the room, leaving us alone in the cold and humming silence of the bunker. Sweet today. He beckoned me to come closer, his hand reaching out to touch the wine stains that were still visible on my ruined wedding dress near my neck. He asked me with a voice that was like velvet over steel, exactly what was on that audio recording that made a man like Harrison willing to risk a murder charged to destroy. I hesitated because I knew that the truth would change the way he looked at me and the way he looked at his own family name and his legacy. I pulled a small digital recorder from my hair, where I had hidden it during the arrest, and I held it in my shaking hand. I told him that Arthur Cromwell was not the saint the world believed him to be, and that he had been using the ghost surgeon to cover up a series of illegal medical experiments on the poor of Manhattan. I said that the night Arthur died, he was trying to kill me because I had found out the truth about his connection to the shadow organization that was now hunting us both. Ryan's face stayed as still as stone, but I saw the vein in his neck throbbing with a silent and lethal rage that was slowly filling the entire room today. He asked me if I had proof that his father was involved in the experiments, and I pressed the play button on the recorder with a heavy and steady hand. The voice of Arthur Cromwell filled the room, cold and arrogant, as he ordered the termination of 3 test subjects who were no longer useful to the project. Ryan closed his eyes for a long second, and when he opened them, they were filled with a light that was so dark it looked like the void of space itself. He told me that the man in black was not working for Victoria, but for a man who was still alive and was far more dangerous than his dead father. He said that the recordings proved that Arthur was just a puppet, and that the real master of the Cromwell Empire was someone I had never even met or heard of until today. I felt the air in the room turn cold as a sudden alarm began to sound throughout the entire facility, a high-pitched screech of a red alert today. The monitors on the wall suddenly flickered to life, showing a fleet of black helicopters approaching the warehouse from the direction of the Atlantic Ocean right now. Ryan stood up, ignoring the pain in his chest, and grabbed a heavy handgun from the drawer of the bedside table. With a steady hand, he told me that they had found us much faster than he expected, and that we had exactly 5 minutes to reach the escape tunnel before the building was leveled. I grabbed the medical kit and Lily's records, and I followed him toward a hidden door in the back of the room that led to a dark and narrow concrete stairway. Today, as we descended, I could hear the sound of explosions above us, and the building shook with a force that felt like a massive earthquake hitting New Jersey right now. Ryan pushed me into a small, high-speed rail car that was waiting on a track that disappeared into the darkness of the earth. He looked at me, his face covered in dust and blood, and he told me that the man in black was actually his own brother, a man nobody knew existed until this very moment. Today, I felt my world tilt as the car accelerated into the tunnel, leaving the fire and the screams of the guards behind us in the burning ruins. I realized that I hadn't just married a king, but I had entered a war between brothers that would destroy everything in its path, including the city of New York. The rail car surged forward, and I held onto Ryan as we disappeared into the black abyss of the unknown and dangerous path ahead. Today, the subterranean rail car surged forward with a violent jolt that threw me against the cold steel interior, and I could feel the vibrations through the floorboards as the speed increased to a level that was never meant for these narrow tunnels. Today, Ryan was already at the control panel, his fingers flying across the holographic interface, while his forehead was covered in a thick layer of sweat and dust from the explosion above us. He told me that the system was being overridden from the outside, and that the emergency brakes were being locked one by a remote terminal that had full administrative access to the Cromwell Transit network. Right now, I gripped the safety rail, watching the digital speedometer climb past 200 miles per hour, knowing that any slight curve in the track would turn this metal box into a coffin for both of us. Today, the air inside the cabin grew thin and hot, smelling of scorched electricity and ozone, as the motors screamed in a high-pitched whine that echoed through the dark abyss of the earth. Ryan looked at me, his gaze dark and filled with a lethal calculation, and he said that Silas was not just trying to kill us, but was trying to turn this escape into a public execution at the Grand Central Terminal Station. Today, I realized then that the war between brothers had reached its most desperate stage, and that Silas knew every secret passage and back door that our father had built into the foundation of New York City right now. Ryan pulled a hidden lever beneath the console, but the rail car only accelerated further, the force pinning me to my seat as the lights of the tunnel became a single blurred streak of white and gray. Today, I asked him who Silas really was and why a brother would be erased so completely from the family records that not even the ghost surgeon had heard his name in the dark corners of the city until now. Ryan's voice was a low growl of pure hatred as he told me that Silas was the firstborn, a man who was deemed too unstable, and, too, cruel even for the cold standards of the Cromwell bloodline today. He explained that Silas had tried to liquidate our mother when we were just children, and that Arthur had spent millions of dollars to fake his death and bury his existence in a private asylum in Switzerland 10 years ago from today. Silas had escaped 5 years ago, the same time that I began my career in the shadows, and he had been building his own empire of blood and glass while waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim his birthright today. Ryan said that the man in black was the true architect of the medical experiments, and that our father was just a weak man trying to appease a monster that he had created and then abandoned. In the dark, I felt the chill of the cursed bloodline settle in my bones, realizing that the man hunting us was a predator who had been trained in the most brutal environments of the world today. Suddenly, the main monitor flickered to life, showing a grainy video feed of a dark room with a single chair and a figure tied down with heavy leather straps and silver wires. Today, I felt my heart stop as I recognized the small frame and the pale face of Lily, my little sister, who was supposed to be safe in the Hamptons under Sarah's elite protection today. A message scrolled across the screen in bright red letters stating that the ghost surgeon had exactly 60 minutes to deliver the audio files, or Lily would be liquidated in a way that would make Arthur's experiments look like acts of mercy. Silas's voice filled the cabin, a hollow and distorted sound that made my skin crawl with 1,000 invisible spiders, telling us that he had already anticipated every move Ryan would make today. He laughed as the speed of the rail car hit 300 miles per hour, and he told us that the only way to save Lily was for me to jump from the train at the next ventilation shaft and bring the recorder to his location alone today. Ryan smashed his fist against the screen, his face twisted in a silent rage, and he told me that he would not let me walk into a trap that Silas had spent years designing for the both of us today. I looked at my sister's face on the monitor, her eyes filled with a terror that I could almost feel through the screen, and I knew that my debt to Ryan was nothing compared to the life of the only family I had left in this cold world today. I grabbed Ryan's arm and told him that we had to stop the train and that I would find a way to Silas, even if it meant walking through the fire and the blood of the entire city today. Ryan ignored me, his hands moving to the main power core beneath the floorboards as he tried to manually disconnect the battery arrays that were feeding the runaway motors today. He told me to use the emergency override code that was hidden in the marriage contract, a sequence of numbers that was meant to be used only in the event of a total corporate takeover or a nuclear strike. I pulled the document from my medical kit, my fingers trembling as I found the string of 24 characters that were written in invisible ink that only reacted to the heat of a human palm. I typed the code into the secondary terminal, and for a second, the rail car slowed, the motors groaning in a heavy and painful protest against the digital commands that were fighting for control today. But Silas was faster, and he released a virus into the system that caused the cabin lights to turn red and the doors to begin to hiss with a dangerous level of air pressure. Today, we were being cooked alive in a metal box that was hurtling toward a massive steel wall that marked the end of the secret line and the beginning of our final and bloody destination. Today, Ryan grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher and smashed the glass of the emergency hatch, telling me that we were going to have to jump at the next curve if we wanted to survive the impact and save Lily. Today, the rail car hit a curve, and the sound of metal grinding against metal was like 1,000 screams of the damned echoing through the subterranean tunnels of Manhattan. Today, Ryan grabbed my waist and pulled me toward the open hatch, the wind rushing in with a force that almost sucked the air out of my lungs and my heart. Today, he told me that on the count of 3, we had to roll out onto the maintenance platform and that we would have exactly 5 seconds to clear the tracks before the train hit the final barrier. Today, I looked at the dark tunnel rushing past us, the shadows and the light blurring into a nightmare of stone and steel, and I felt the weight of the silver knife against my thigh once more in this cold night air. Today, Ryan counted down, his voice steady, even as his bandages began to soak through with a fresh layer of bright and terrifying blood from his surgical wounds that were opening up. Today, 3, 2, 1, and we threw ourselves into the abyss, our bodies hitting the hard concrete of the platform with a force that shattered my breath and my sense of reality. Today, I felt my shoulder dislocate, a sharp and white, hot pain blooming in my arm, but I didn't stop moving as I crawled toward the edge of the platform while the rail car disappeared into the darkness with a loud roar. Seconds later, a deafening explosion rocked the tunnel, a wall of fire and heat washing over us as the train hit the barrier and turned into a massive fireball of twisted metal and burning dreams beneath the city. I lay on the cold concrete, my breath coming in jagged gasps of smoke and dust as I watched the fire illuminate the dark and ancient tunnels of the Cromwell Empire. Today, Ryan was lying next to me, his face covered in soot and his eyes closed, and I feared, for a second, that the jump had finished what the glass shard had started in the penthouse. Today, I crawled over to him, my good arm pulling my body through the dirt, and I felt for his pulse, finding it weak but still persistent against the cold skin of his neck. Today, suddenly, my phone vibrated in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a live video call from an unknown and blocked number that was coming from the Hamptons safe house. Today, the screen showed Silas standing in front of the safe house, his black coat fluttering in the wind, and in his hand he held a small, bloodied shoe that belonged to Lily. Today, he didn't say a word. He just looked into the camera with a smile that was so empty. It felt like looking into the eyes of a shark in the deep and dark ocean. Today, he dropped the shoe into the dirt and walked away, leaving me with the realization that the safe house had been compromised and that everyone I trusted was either dead or in his custody. Today, I let out a sound that was half a scream and half a sob as the realization of my total and absolute failure washed over me in the dark and silent Tunnel today. Ryan opened his eyes, and his hand reached out to grab mine, his grip tighter than it had ever been as he told me that the war was just beginning and that we would hunt Silas to the ends of the earth from now to day.